Hello again, YouTube. So today we are going to be looking at user input in C++. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start by creating a new file. Let's call it user input.cpp. Okay, so as with the other files that we've created, you always start with # include iostream to import cout and other stuff like that. Make sure that you're using the standard namespace. And then as always, everything that we're writing right now until we learn about different functions will be contained inside of int main. And then that takes in the command line arguments of argc, argpointer, argv, right? Okay, so now we have our main to work with. Okay, so let's start with a kind of Mad Lib type program today in order to illustrate user input. So let's start by using what we already know to create a Mad Lib. So we'll create a name variable with our name, and then another string variable, call it color, our favorite color. And then lastly, we'll create an int that holds the number of pets we have. We'll call it numpets. In my case, it equals 3. Okay, so now we want to print these out Mad Lib style, and in a sense that's basically just filling a blank for anyone who's not familiar. So let's set up the basic prompt. So we're going to use cout, and using our name we're going to say hello, my name is, and then it's important to keep this space here because otherwise remember that cout does exactly what you tell it to. So if you don't have this space, when you print out the name like we're about to with name, it'll actually just like mash together and be one long word. It'll be is and then your name all together without a space in between. So make sure you physically add that space in, and then we'll do it on a new line after that. So now in order to use the color, we'll say my favorite color is, and then we'll do color, and then end line. And then one more, to use the number of pets, we'll say I have, that space, num pets, and then again make sure to do a space afterwards, otherwise your number of pets would mesh together and not have a space in between it where you put pets. And then again we'll do end line. Okay, so this should all be not necessarily a review, but should all make sense. We're just using cout like we've used before. As I touched on earlier, but I don't know how much it showcased it, how you see that these arrows kind of work like a plus. You're like, I want this string plus this string plus this string to all be printed out. So that's how it kind of works, like a plus or a concatenate in cout for different words and strings that you're printing. So let's go ahead and run this program just to see what its output looks like. So again, we just do g++, user, you can start writing it and then hit tab, it'll autocomplete. And great, we have no compiler errors. And again, in order to run it, do /a.out. And just like we expected, it says, hello, my name is Cameron, my favorite color is red, and I have 3 pets. Okay, so this works great if we have, like you're the user that wrote the code and you're also printing out. But what happens if we want someone else to use our code that almost definitely has a different name or different color or number of pets, or all of them are different? So this is where user input comes in, where you actually get, as it suggests, user input from the user in order to fill in your code. So let's get started with that. So for now, I'm going to get rid of what I had written. So that way we have these same variables, but right now they're filled with nothing. Again, you could initialize these if you want to be extra safe, like int numpets equals 0. I guess this is a good point to show how you can initialize things to being empty. In this case, it's not necessarily crucial because we're going to be initializing them right after, so we know that they're going to be initialized before we're used. But say, for example, I just left it at string name and I hadn't added the empty string, or the same thing with like int numpets. If I hadn't set to 0, if I just said int numpets, and then like down here on this line I go to actually print out numpets, it'll either print out some really weird value or your code will crash. So if you ever get really weird things, you're like, how'd that happen? It probably means that you're printing or working with a variable that is not initialized. But in our case, we're going to initialize it right now, so it's not really a major concern. So in order to initialize it, we're again going to use cout in order to prompt the user for the different info. So it'll look like this. And there's lots of different styles. For a case like this, I'm just going to do a colon and then a space. You could also do an end line, so that way the user would be entering it, like it would say the statement and then underneath would be the line. But this works just fine for our case. And you can always, that's the great thing about coding, you could try it out, throw in an end line there and see how it changes the code. But it's not going to change it functionally, it'll just look a little bit different. And then now takes us to the new user input that we have to use. So always we've been using cout, which stands for coutput. And then for user input, you use cin. So they're very related. And you'll notice that the arrows are pointed to the right now. And again, I've touched on this in my other video, but the way I remember it is cout is pointed out of the screen, the arrows, so it's like going to the terminal or to the output, whereas cin, it points into the variable name. So whatever the user inputs, it's going to store it in the variable name. And that's how I think about it. There's lots of different ways to think about it, or you can just remember it how it is, because it's only 2 things to remember. But I like to remember it that way. That's how I was taught to. Okay, so that's how we will get the user input. And what it will do is the cin will take the whatever is typed in the terminal and store it into the string name. And so we can do the same exact thing for the other variables. So we'll do please enter your favorite color. And then cin color. And then one more. Please enter your number of pets. cin pets. Okay. So now we will have prompted the user and gotten all the variables, and now they'll be updated in our final result for the actual values that they pass in, instead of just being preset values that we had to set from the beginning when we create the program. So let's go ahead and try it out and see how it works. So we're going to save it. Let's go ahead and recompile it. .a.out. Please enter your name. So let's do something different this time, just so you can see that it's not just going to print what was done before. Name Billy. Let's do color is blue. Let's say Billy really likes pets, so he has 8 pets. Now you'll see the program prints it out with the updated values. You can run it again with different values. Charlie, maybe their favorite color is yellow, and they have 0 pets. Okay, and as you can see, it works exactly the same. So this has been an introduction to cin, and one thing I do want to note, I can go back to the code real quick to show this. Cin only works, so this is only really a case with strings, but cin, you can't have a space because it reads until the space. So say if you tried to enter your full name, in fact I guess I can show that. So let's go ahead and run it. So if we'll write a full name like that, as you can see, what it does is the space goes to the next cin. So if you tried to print stuff out right now, so 0 do pets, what it does is it takes the first word Billy and stores it in the first cin for name, and it'll take that second word and store it or it'll take Joel and it'll store it in the second variable, which is color. And then pets is unaffected because it already but if we had entered a third thing, like if we did Billy something Joel, then it would fill all three in and never ask for the user to prompt anything. So be careful of that. And also be careful of the type that you store it in. So to show exactly what I mean, so strings are like the loosest one, so you can just type a name and you don't really have to worry about it. So these were both strings. But now now ints, what happens if I put, I write in a word for when it's supposed to be storing a number. In this case, it defaulted to 0, but it's actually unpredictable what it will do. So your code could crash. It kind of based on your compiler and the system you're running it on. But if you think about it, you're trying to store the word letter inside of a number, and it sometimes doesn't know how to handle that. Sometimes it'll crash. Sometimes it'll get really weird looking values. Yeah, sometimes it just won't run. In this case, it defaulted to 0, which is kind of weird. But that's another thing to keep in mind. So you can do what's called user input checking. So there's ways to actually check what the user entered and parse the string and make sure it's a number that was entered. There's lots of different stuff you can do, which we won't get into now. But just know that there are ways around it. It's not like something that you have to take into account always with your code and make sure that the user doesn't enter it. But that's something to keep in mind. And then there is a way to fix the space problem that we had, and it's called getLine. So it's a built-in function, and then it looks like this. So when you're using getLine, you're going to be using cin as your input thing. It needs some type of way to get input, and it also needs where it stores the variable. But what this will do is if we hit a space, it won't take everything out of the equation. Like how with Billy Joel, it took the first word and then it filled in the second string as well. It won't do it if you do getLine. getLine reads until you hit enter. So that way, this is how you work with words when you want multiple word inputs from the user. But you do have to be careful with getLine because getLine and cin don't work well together, because essentially there's this buffer that's created, and cin will have a space in that buffer, and getLine will have a new line in that buffer. So if you call cin right after calling getLine, so if I change this to getLine, but then I keep all these as cin, there'll be some weird behavior, like it might skip or it might ask for something twice. So yeah, keep that in mind. I'm not going to go too into getLine right now, but just know that there are different ways around this problem of all the different problems that we discussed with entering a number when you're supposed to, or entering a word when you're supposed to have an int, and also having spaces in your code. But we won't go into them because you don't need them for just basic user input. getLine is probably the next step to look into if you want to be able to enter spaces. But just know that getLine and cin don't work super well together unless you clear the buffer, and C++ has functions for that, but it's a little more advanced. So for right now, I would say stick with cin just to get the gist of how user input works. Okay, I hope this video was helpful. There'll be more to come. In the comments, you can definitely let me know any questions that you have about the code, and I'd be happy to answer, or any questions in general.